The calm before the storm. The galaxy was at peace, or so it seemed. The Galactic Empire, with its mighty fleets and countless planets under its control, ruled without challenge. For generations, it had been the dominant power, crushing any opposition with ease. Its soldiers and commanders walked the halls of power with confidence, their enemies nothing more than distant memories. But something stirred in the far reaches of space, far from the Empire's prying eyes. On Earth, a forgotten force was waking up. Humanity's fleet, lost to time and buried beneath the weight of history, was coming back to life. And no one, not even the Empire, knew what was about to happen. The Empire had long since stopped worrying about Earth. The humans had been nothing more than a footnote in galactic history, their technology old, their military weak. After all, what could a primitive race of humans possibly do against the might of the Empire? They had no place in the modern galaxy. The Empire's generals often mocked Earth's outdated weapons, calling them relics of a bygone era. But the Empire had forgotten one thing. The humans were not done yet. For years, Earth had been building in secret. Hidden away in the deep corners of space, humanity's greatest weapon was being prepared. No one knew about it, not even the most powerful leaders in the galaxy. The ancient ships, once thought to be useless, were now being repaired, their weapons recharged. The Earth that the Empire had written off was about to show them that they were far from finished. In the heart of Earth's secret base, scientists and military leaders worked tirelessly. The old ships were not as technologically advanced as the Empire's, but they were fierce and unpredictable. There was power in their simplicity, something the Empire had never understood. The crew, too, was different. These were not just soldiers, they were survivors. Survivors of a long-forgotten war. Survivors who knew what it meant to fight for their home. The ships began to move, one by one, as Earth's fleet slowly awoke. Their engines hummed to life, shaking off centuries of rust and dust. These ships had seen battles before, had fought in wars that no one remembered. But now, they were being called upon again. This was not a time for peace. This was a time for vengeance. The fleet's commander, Admiral Steele, stood at the front of the bridge, watching the stars as they passed by. His face was grim, his eyes sharp. He knew the task ahead would not be easy. The Empire was vast, and their fleet was powerful. But Steele wasn't worried. He knew humanity's fleet had something the Empire didn't. Determination. "Prepare the fleet," Admiral Steele ordered, his voice steady. "We're about to show the galaxy that Earth still matters." The commanders of each ship received the message. One by one, they gave the orders to their crews, activating systems, checking weapons, and preparing for the journey ahead. There was no turning back now. The first ships left Earth's atmosphere, their engines roaring to life as they shot into the vastness of space. The fleet, though small, was mighty. It was fast, it was relentless, and it was ready to make its mark. Every ship carried with it a piece of Earth's history, a piece of its heart. Each ship was a symbol of what humanity had been through, of what it had endured. As the fleet moved further into space, they encountered little resistance. The Empire had no reason to watch for Earth's ships. They assumed nothing would come of these ancient, outdated vessels. But they were wrong. The first Empire outpost the fleet encountered was small and unassuming, a listening post on the edge of the galaxy. The humans had no intention of attacking it. At least not yet. They needed information. They needed to know where the Empire's fleets were stationed, where their strengths and weaknesses lay. As the fleet approached, sensors picked up the faintest traces of Empire activity. They were close. Too close. Admiral Steele stood at the command console, his hand hovering over the button that would engage the fleet's weapons. "We're not here to start a war," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. But then he saw the data flooding in. The Empire wasn't just sitting idly by. Their forces were already responding. They had no idea what they were about to face. Suddenly, alarms blared, and the ships began to shake as the first shots were fired. The Empire's scouts had detected the human fleet, and they were attacking. The humans weren't prepared for this. Their first encounter with the Empire would not be peaceful. Admiral Steele's eyes hardened. The fleet had come to the galaxy's doorstep, and the Empire had just made their first mistake. Earth's fleet was not here to negotiate. Earth was here to fight. The fleet moved into position, preparing for a fight they hadn't anticipated, but were more than ready for. The calm before the storm was over. Humanity had arrived. And for the first time, in a long time, the Galactic Empire would face a real challenge. The first clash. As the human fleet glided silently through the vastness of space, the tension was palpable. Every crew member aboard the ships knew the stakes were high. This wasn't just a battle for victory. It was a battle for survival. The Galactic Empire, with its overwhelming might, had never faced anything like this before. No one had ever dared challenge their dominance in centuries. And now, Earth's fleet, hidden for so long, was making its move. Admiral Steele stood at the command center, his hands firmly gripping the armrests of his chair. His mind raced, running through the strategies and contingencies. It was the first engagement, and it would set the tone for the rest of the campaign. He couldn't afford to fail, not when so much was on the line. He glanced at the holographic display in front of him, showing the positions of his fleet and the Empire's outpost. "All ships, prepare for engagement," he ordered, his voice unwavering. The human ships were not sleek, not as fast or technologically advanced as the Empire's. They were relics, repurposed for war, but they had one advantage that no one could have predicted: unpredictability. The Empire's fleet had grown complacent, relying on its superior technology to win every battle. They had forgotten the raw power of humanity, the sheer will to survive. The first shots were fired before Steele even had a chance to give the order. A group of Empire scouts, realizing too late that they were in danger, launched their attack. The Empire ships were faster and more agile, but their laser blasts were nowhere near as accurate as the humans' weapons. The human fleet had the element of surprise. "Return fire," Steele commanded calmly. The moment his orders were given, the fleet's weapons systems came online, and massive energy pulses shot out of the human ships. The Empire's scout ships were caught off guard, and the first few were quickly destroyed in a burst of flames. The human fleet pressed forward, its ships moving in tight formations, their weapons lighting up the void of space. The Empire's scouts had underestimated their enemies. What had appeared to be old, clunky relics were now deadly weapons in the hands of humans. "Target their communication arrays," Steele ordered, as the Empire tried to regroup. "We need to disrupt their ability to call for reinforcements." The human ships, though slower, had weapons that were powerful enough to disrupt the Empire's communications. The Empire's fleet was vast, but its ships were spread out, and the humans knew that they couldn't take on the entire Empire at once. They had to strike fast, confuse the enemy, and create chaos. As the human ships launched targeted strikes on the Empire's outposts and communication hubs, the Empire scrambled to respond. They had never faced a force like this. The scouts, now crippled and disorganized, could do little to stop the relentless human onslaught. "Enemy reinforcements are on the way," one of the officers reported. Admiral Steele didn't flinch. "We'll make sure they never reach us. Maintain position. We've already won this fight." The humans weren't just fighting for victory. They were fighting to send a message. The message was clear. Earth was back, and humanity wasn't afraid to fight. The Empire's reinforcements arrived, but they were too late. The human fleet had already completed their mission. The communication arrays were down, and the Empire's forces were now blind. The humans' surprise attack had caught them off guard, and now Earth's fleet had the upper hand. The battle wasn't over, but the first wave of the fight was already a stunning success for humanity. The Galactic Empire, the once unstoppable force, was no longer so certain of its superiority. It wasn't just the human ships that had caught the Empire off guard. It was their spirit, their sheer willpower. The humans' fleet moved forward, undeterred and confident, as they left the wreckage of the Empire's scout ships behind. The battle was just beginning, but one thing was clear. Humanity's fleet was no longer just a myth or a forgotten story. It was a force to be reckoned with. Admiral Steele looked out at the stars, knowing that this victory was only the first of many. The Empire had thought it was invincible. They had been wrong. The storm had arrived, and it was only getting started. The Empire strikes back. The aftershocks of the initial clash had left the Galactic Empire shaken, but they weren't defeated, not yet. After the human fleet's surprise attack, the Empire had regrouped, their commanders scrambling to organize a counteroffensive. Their pride had been wounded, and no one in the Empire was willing to let such an insult stand. This was the beginning of a battle that would define the fate of the galaxy. Admiral Steele sat in his command center, his fingers drumming on the armrests of his chair. His fleet had made a bold statement, but he knew it wasn't over. The Empire wasn't known for backing down easily. They had immense resources, advanced technology, and vast fleets at their disposal. Steele had to be ready for the Empire's retaliation. "Report," Steele called out, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. His communications officer quickly responded, "We've detected several large fleets mobilizing. The Empire is preparing to strike back with everything they have." Steele nodded. This was expected. The first strike had been a success, but the real test was yet to come. The Empire wasn't just going to roll over. It was going to throw everything it had into this fight. The calm before the storm was over. Now, humanity would face the full fury of the Galactic Empire. Outside the command center's window, the fleet's ships drifted silently in the vastness of space, their metal frames gleaming against the backdrop of stars. They were ready, but Steele knew the human fleet's power had to be used carefully. The Empire would strike with overwhelming force, and he had to ensure his forces were prepared for what was coming. The human ships were slower, less advanced in some ways, but they had one thing the Empire lacked: a deep understanding of their limitations and an ability to fight through them. Humanity had learned to overcome adversity with creativity, cunning, and relentless determination. The Empire, on the other hand, had grown arrogant and complacent in its strength. This would be their downfall. "Prepare to engage," Steele said firmly. "We need to hit them hard before they can regroup. Once they do, they'll have the numbers. Let's not give them that chance." As the first wave of Empire ships emerged from the dark reaches of space, the human fleet moved into position. The battle had begun in earnest. Steele's heart raced, but his mind remained sharp. This was it. The fight for the galaxy's future would unfold right here, right now. The Empire ships were massive, their advanced weaponry far superior to the outdated technology the humans had at their disposal. But what the humans lacked in firepower, they made up for with their tactics. The Empire's ships were used to dominating, to obliterating anything that stood in their way. But they weren't prepared for a battle of wits. The Empire's flagship, a towering behemoth, led the charge, its weapons charging with destructive energy. It was a fearsome sight, and the humans couldn't afford to underestimate it. But Steele's eyes narrowed as he observed its movements. He had studied the Empire's tactics, and he knew that their ships often relied on brute force and firepower over strategy. "Send the signal to the fleet," Steele ordered. "We're going to hit them where it hurts." The human fleet didn't rush headlong into battle. Instead, they carefully repositioned, setting traps, drawing the Empire in. Their movements were swift, coordinated, and deliberate. As the Empire fleet charged forward, the humans unleashed a deadly barrage of firepower, targeting the enemy's weak points. The Empire flagship fired first, its weapons lighting up the void of space in a blinding display. But the human ships moved with agility, dodging the shots with precision, firing back at strategic points. The Empire's flagship took several hits, its shields flickering, and for the first time in a long while, there was a crack in the Empire's seemingly invincible armor. Direct hit on their main reactor, reported one of the officers on Steele's ship. The flagship is taking damage. Steele allowed himself a brief smile. The first hit had been delivered, but the battle was far from over. The Empire wasn't going to retreat so easily. Despite the Empire's immense firepower, the human fleet's mobility allowed them to outmaneuver the larger ships, focusing on disabling weapons and key infrastructure. The battle raged on, each side trading blows in the silent void of space. It was a brutal contest, but the humans were holding their ground. The Empire had underestimated humanity's resolve and ingenuity. They had thought their massive ships would overpower the human fleet with ease. They were wrong. As the battle raged, Steele knew that this was only the beginning. They had struck the Empire's pride, but now they had to hold their ground and press their advantage. The war had only just begun, and the human fleet would have to fight for every inch of space. But for the first time, the Empire had learned a lesson. Humanity wasn't something to be taken lightly. The first blow had been struck, and it was just the beginning of a much larger conflict. Turning the tide. The human fleet's tactics had caught the Galactic Empire off guard, but the Empire's pride was not easily shattered. In response to humanity's unexpected resilience, the Empire was escalating their assault. The initial surprise had worn off, and now the full weight of their military might was coming to bear. Humanity's fleet was facing its greatest challenge yet. Admiral Steele stood at the helm of the flagship, his gaze fixed on the battle unfolding before him. The Empire's retaliatory forces had arrived in full force, hundreds of warships, each more powerful than anything humanity had ever faced. The odds were stacking up against them, but Steele had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. This time, however, the stakes were higher than ever. Status report. Steele barked. His communications officer responded quickly. We've sustained heavy damage to the forward shields. Admiral, the Empire's fleet is overwhelming us with firepower. We need reinforcements now. Steele's expression darkened, but he didn't flinch. He had expected this. The Empire would never give up so easily. They had underestimated humanity once, but they weren't about to make the same mistake twice. Steele's mind raced, calculating their options. He knew that with the current situation, brute force alone would not win the battle. It was time for something unexpected, something the Empire would never anticipate. Divert all power to the engines, Steele commanded. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We need to draw them into our trap. The human fleet was already outnumbered, but they still had something the Empire lacked: the element of surprise. Steele's plan was risky, but it was their only chance. The humans weren't going to win by fighting head-on. They would need to lure the Empire into a false sense of security, to make them believe that the battle was all but won. And then, when the time was right, humanity would strike back with everything they had. Admiral, the Empire flagship is coming into range, the weapons officer reported. It's locked onto us. They're ready to fire. Steele's heart pounded, but he remained calm. He'd been in situations like this before. His crew knew what they had to do. It was time to put the plan into action. Brace for impact, Steele said. The Empire flagship's weapons charge, sending a massive volley of energy beams directly toward Steele's ship. The barrage hit, but Steele had already ordered evasive maneuvers. The ship veered sharply to the side, narrowly avoiding the full force of the blast. The impact still shook the ship, and warning lights flashed across the bridge. We've lost primary engines, the engineer reported. We're drifting. Steele gritted his teeth. The situation was growing dire, but the Empire had fallen into the trap. The flagship, in its overconfidence, had followed their ship too closely, leaving its flanks exposed. Steele saw the opening he had been waiting for. Fire all weapons. Full power, Steele ordered. In a flash, the human fleet unleashed everything they had. Laser cannons, torpedoes, and railguns fired in rapid succession, hitting the Empire flagship with precision. The enemy flagship's shields were no match for the concentrated barrage. Within moments, its shields flickered and failed, and the first of many enemy ships began to take critical damage. Direct hit to their engines. "They're losing power," the weapons officer shouted. The Empire flagship began to slow, drifting in space as critical systems failed. The human fleet, once struggling to hold its ground, now had the upper hand. Steele's plan had worked. Now, while they're disoriented, hit them with everything. Steele ordered, his voice steady with determination. The human fleet moved in like a swarm of predators, picking off the Empire's ships one by one. The Empire's retaliation was now disorganized, its flagship crippled and its coordination fractured. The human ships, though smaller and less advanced, fought with fierce precision, exploiting every weakness in the enemy's armor. But Steele knew that this victory wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The Galactic Empire would not surrender so easily. They would regroup, they would retaliate. The war was far from over. Steele had to be ready for what was coming next. He turned to his first officer, Commander Laney. "Prepare the fleet for a second wave. We've caught them off guard, but this isn't over. We need to finish this now, before they can recover." "Yes, sir," Laney replied, her face set with determination. As the battle continued to rage, Steele watched the destruction unfold. The human fleet had turned the tide, but there was no time to rest. The Empire would strike back harder than before, but this time, Steele was ready. The human fleet had shown the galaxy what it was capable of. The Empire had underestimated them once, but they would never make that mistake again. In the cold, dark void of space, humanity's battle for survival had just begun. The Empire strikes back. The battle had shifted, but the fight was far from over. The Galactic Empire, once a colossus of power and control, now found itself staggering. Humanity's fleet had struck decisively, crippling their flagship and causing disarray among their forces. However, even in disarray, the Empire was dangerous. They had the resources, the numbers, and the pride to rise again, no matter the cost. Admiral Steele stood on the bridge of the flagship, his mind racing through endless calculations. The Empire would not sit idly by and let this humiliation stand. They would regroup, and they would retaliate. Humanity's victory, while significant, was only a temporary setback for the Empire. Steele's task now was to prepare for that inevitable counterattack. "Status update," Steele demanded, his voice calm but sharp. "Admiral, we've disabled several of their ships, but they're regrouping. More enemy ships are arriving from the rear," Commander Laney reported. "We're outnumbered again." Steele's face darkened. It was a sobering thought, but not an unexpected one. The Empire had vast reserves, and they were prepared to fight until the last. He had to make a decision, quickly. "We don't have the time to wait for reinforcements," Steele said. "We must press the advantage we've gained before they can reorganize." Laney nodded grimly. "Understood, sir, but we need a new strategy. Their counteroffensive is coming fast." The Empire was bringing in additional ships, and with those ships came the terrifying firepower that had made the Galactic Empire so feared in the first place. The humans had stunned them, but now it was time for the Empire to show its might. Admiral Steele took a deep breath, narrowing his focus. He knew that this next phase of the battle was critical. If they didn't keep the pressure on, the Empire would recover, and the situation would return to square one. Humanity's chance to win this war hinged on their ability to outthink, outmaneuver, and outblast the enemy. "Commander, I want every ship to move to the edge of the battlefield, but don't engage just yet," Steele instructed. "Let the Empire think they're gaining ground. We need to draw them into the open." Laney raised an eyebrow. "You're using the same tactics again. It worked once, but are we sure it will work a second time?" "We don't have the luxury of trying anything else," Steele replied firmly. "We draw them in. We make them overconfident, and then, when they're too close, we destroy them." The plan was risky, but Steele had no choice. If the Empire was given time to regroup, They would be stronger than before. Humanity's only hope was to keep the pressure on and exploit the smallest of openings. As Steele watched the movements of the enemy fleet, he could feel the tension rising. The Empire wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. The air was thick with the hum of engines and the distant roar of weapons fire. "Admiral, the Empire fleet is closing in. They're preparing to launch another strike," Laney warned, eyes fixed on her console. The humans had the element of surprise, but that advantage was quickly slipping away. The Empire's sheer numbers were beginning to overwhelm the outer flanks of humanity's fleet. Steele knew that the Empire's arrogance was about to turn against them. They would think they had won the upper hand, but Steele was ready. "Hold your fire. Wait for my signal," Steele ordered. The seconds felt like hours as Steele watched the Empire's ships approach. His fingers twitched, hovering over the command buttons. Every instinct in him screamed for action. The tension was palpable. Then it happened. The Empire flagship, in its pursuit of the seemingly retreating human ships, ventured too far into the open. The time had come. Steele slammed his fist down on the console in front of him. "Now," he shouted. The human fleet erupted into action. Laser beams, missiles, and energy blasts fired from every direction, catching the Empire off guard. The ships that had seemed to retreat were now circling back with deadly precision. The Empire flagship was hit first, its shields unable to handle the combined force of humanity's attack. As the flagship exploded in a flash of fiery brilliance, the rest of the Empire's fleet faltered. Direct hit on their central command ship. The weapons officer called out. "Keep it up. Target their engines," Steele ordered. In a matter of moments, the tide of the battle shifted again. The Empire's fleet, once poised for a decisive victory, now found itself scattered and vulnerable. The momentum had shifted in favor of humanity, and the Empire was struggling to keep up. But the Empire's response was swift. They had underestimated humanity once, but now they knew better. As the Empire regrouped and retaliated with its remaining forces, Steele knew that the human fleet's survival was not guaranteed. The Empire had vast resources, and their thirst for revenge was boundless. But the humans had something the Empire didn't: the will to fight. As the battle raged on, Steele steeled himself for what would come next. This was just the beginning. The war was far from over. But in the depths of space, humanity had proven one thing: they were a force to be reckoned with. The Empire strikes back with fury. The Empire's retaliatory strike came faster than anyone expected. After the stunning loss of their flagship, the remaining fleet had regrouped with a vengeance. The battle lines in the vastness of space were drawn again. But this time, the tension was heavier. Humanity's victory had come at a cost, and now the Galactic Empire was furious. Admiral Steele stood before the holographic map of the battlefield, watching the enemy fleet slowly approach. The damage they had inflicted was severe, but the Empire's resilience was legendary. Their pride was wounded, and they wouldn't stop until they had avenged the losses. Humanity had taken one step forward, but it would have to fight to stay alive. "We've hurt them," Steele muttered under his breath. "But they're not finished yet." "Sir, their fleet is reforming at a faster pace than we anticipated," Commander Laney reported. "They're gathering forces around their largest warships, preparing for a counterattack." "Not good enough," Steele snapped, his voice hard. "We've faced worse than this. Let them come." The Empire was on the attack once more, but this time, Steele knew they had to be careful. The Empire was like a wounded animal, unpredictable and dangerous. Humanity's fleet couldn't afford another mistake. The earlier victory had given them hope, but the real battle was just beginning. "Prepare for a full-scale assault," Steele ordered. "Launch all available fighters, and I want the heavy artillery to focus on their command ships. We take down their leadership, and the rest will fall." The orders were clear. The human fleet would not retreat, not even a step. It would stand its ground and fight with everything they had. The silence on the bridge was deafening as the crew got to work, readying their weapons and preparing for what would come next. Outside the ship's hull, in the infinite abyss of space, the Empire's ships closed in like an unstoppable force. Their massive dreadnoughts and battlecruisers were daunting, their weapons capable of annihilating entire fleets with a single shot. But Steele knew that the true strength of humanity wasn't in their ships or weapons, it was in their will to fight. As the Empire's fleet closed in, the first wave of human fighter ships launched into the void. Their small, nimble designs darted between the enormous enemy warships, striking with pinpoint accuracy before retreating into the safety of their larger fleet. The battle was swift and brutal, with explosions lighting up the darkness of space. But the Empire had learned from their earlier mistakes. Their response was fast and overwhelming. Massive energy blasts from their largest ships tore into the ranks of humanity's fleet. The first wave of human ships faltered, their shields buckling under the pressure. But Steele remained calm, knowing the fight wasn't over. "They're underestimating us again," Steele muttered to himself. "They think they've won." The human fleet, although outnumbered, fought back fiercely. Their ships, though less advanced than the Empire's, carried an unexpected strength. Human ingenuity had created technology that rivaled the might of the Empire. And more importantly, humanity's spirit could not be broken so easily. Steele's eyes focused on the approaching enemy fleet. The Empire had broken through the first line of defense, but they were not yet at the heart of humanity's strength. The core of the human fleet lay hidden, out of sight, but ready to strike at the perfect moment. "Commander, how are we doing on the flanks?" Steele asked, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Their lead ships are taking heavy damage, sir, but they're regrouping fast. We may have to pull back soon or risk being overrun," Laney replied, her face tense as she monitored the battle. Steele clenched his fists, frustration mounting. The Empire was relentless, but he wouldn't allow them to win. The fight for humanity's survival had come down to this. If they lost here, it would be over. "No retreat," Steele ordered firmly. "We push forward. Let them think they've won, but keep them off balance. Once we got them where we want them, we strike." The next move was a game of patience. The Empire was pressing hard, but Steele wasn't ready to make a final push just yet. He knew that the next wave of the battle would decide the fate of both sides. As the two fleets continued to clash in space, Steele's mind raced. The human fleet had taken hits, but they had held strong. It was the Empire's arrogance, Steele believed, that would be their downfall. They were overconfident, believing that they were untouchable. That overconfidence was their greatest weakness, and Steele was about to exploit it. The Empire wasn't used to facing an enemy who refused to back down. Humanity had already shown them that they could hold their own. Now, it was time to show them just how far humanity would go to protect their future. Suddenly, a blast shook the bridge. The warning lights flashed red, and alarms blared through the ship. Laney's voice cut through the chaos. "Admiral, the enemy flagship is targeting us directly." Steele's heart raced, but he stood his ground. "Brace for impact. Return fire. Now." The human fleet's weapons lit up the void, unleashing a barrage of fire that would test the Empire's defenses like never before. The battle was far from over, and both sides knew it. Humanity had proven it could fight and survive, but now they had to prove they could win. As the battle raged on, the story of humanity's strength and resilience would continue to unfold. With every shot fired, every ship lost, and every life given, the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. And Admiral Steele knew one thing for sure: humanity wasn't going down without a fight. The final clash. The two fleets were locked in a deadly dance, the roar of battle echoing across the cold expanse of space. The human fleet had held its ground against the Empire's overwhelming firepower, but the final clash was approaching. The enemy flagship was still in play, and it would take all of humanity's strength and strategy to bring it down. Admiral Steele stood on the bridge of the flagship, eyes fixed on the holographic battlefield before him. His crew worked tirelessly, moving between consoles and relaying information as the battle raged outside. Despite the damage, the human fleet had not backed down. They were still fighting, still pushing forward with everything they had. "Status report, Commander," Steele asked, his voice calm but determined. "Sir, the Empire's flagship is heavily fortified, but we've disabled several of their support ships," Commander Laney reported. "The fleet is holding, but we can't take many more hits." Steele nodded, his mind calculating the next move. Humanity was close to victory, but the Empire's command ship was the key. It was the beating heart of their military might, and if they could bring it down, the battle would be theirs. The problem was, the Empire had positioned its flagship at the center of the formation, heavily guarded by powerful warships and defense platforms. Steele looked at the status of the remaining human ships. Many had taken damage, and some had already been lost, but the spirit of the crew remained unbroken. The Empire might have had superior firepower, but humanity had something they could never match: resilience. Steele knew that if they could hold on for just a little longer, they would have a chance to turn the tide. "Prepare for the final strike," Steele ordered, his voice full of resolve. "Sir, are we going for the flagship?" Laney asked, her eyes meeting Steele's with a mix of concern and hope. "Yes," Steele replied. "We may be outgunned, but we're not out of this fight. We've been underestimated from the beginning, and now it's time to finish this. We strike at their heart, and the rest of their fleet will fall." The tension in the air was palpable. The human fleet was ready to make its final move. Fighters launched into the fray once again, weaving through enemy fire as they closed in on their target. The massive warships of the Empire fired back, but they were slow to react to the agility of humanity's ships. The humans had learned from every battle, adapting quickly, anticipating the Empire's moves. As the human fleet charged forward, Steele's mind raced. This was it. The battle would either end in victory or defeat, and everything depended on this moment. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the ship. The Empire had launched a counteroffensive, targeting the heart of the human fleet. Steele's eyes widened as he saw the devastation unfold on the holographic map. One of their largest warships had been hit, its shields failing under the Empire's relentless barrage. "Get me a report on the damage," Steele shouted, his heart racing. He couldn't afford to lose another ship at this crucial stage. "Sir, their shields are down, but the hull is intact," came the report. "We've sustained damage, but we can keep going." Steele nodded grimly. They would keep going. There was no other choice. "Focus fire on the Empire's flagship," Steele commanded, his voice unwavering. "All ships, target their command center. We end this now." With one final push, the human fleet launched everything they had left. The barrage of fire from their ships lit up the darkness of space, streaks of energy racing towards the heart of the Empire's fleet. The Empire's defenses were formidable, but they couldn't withstand the coordinated assault from humanity's forces. Steele watched the holographic display with a sense of grim satisfaction as their firepower tore through the enemy's defenses. The enemy flagship's shields flickered, then failed, and its massive hull began to crack under the pressure. With one final explosion, the flagship went silent, the heart of the Empire's fleet falling in defeat. The remaining Empire ships began to retreat, their command structure shattered. The human fleet had broken through. The victory was theirs. "Victory is ours," Steele murmured, a sense of disbelief washing over him. The fight had been long, and they had lost many good men and women, but in the end, humanity had triumphed. The Galactic Empire, the most powerful force in the galaxy, had been defeated by the strength, resolve, and resilience of the human spirit. But Steele knew that this victory wasn't just about the battle won. It was about proving something much more important, that humanity would never be conquered. Against all odds, they had stood tall, and now, the galaxy would know them for what they were, a force to be reckoned with. The human fleet, battered but unbowed, stood victorious. The Galactic Empire had been humbled, and as the stars twinkled in the distance, Steele felt a sense of pride and purpose he had never known before. This was only the beginning.